I told my daughter I had been diagnosed with something serious on a Wednesday afternoon in February. I sat across from her in my living room, in the chair I have sat in for 23 years, with my hands in my lap and my voice steady in the way that a man's voice is steady when he has been preparing to say something difficult and has practiced the steadiness enough that it does not waver when the moment arrives. I told her the doctor had found something. I told her it was early, but it was real. I told her I did not want to frighten her, but I wanted her to know. She crossed the room and hugged me. She held on for a long time, the specific long hold of a woman who means what she is doing with her body, and she cried, real tears, the kind that are not performed. I held her back. I said it was going to be all right, which was true, though not for the reason she believed. Then she pulled back and said she needed a moment, and she went to the kitchen. I sat in my chair, and I listened. Her voice came through the kitchen doorway low and fast, the voice of someone who wants to be quiet, and cannot quite hold the urgency of what they are saying, down to a whisper. I heard specific words because I was listening for them, because I had been listening for them before I ever sat down in that chair and said what I said. What she said about the house left me standing frozen in the hallway when I went to find her. Not figuratively. I walked to the kitchen doorway and I stopped and I stood there and I could not make myself move, because what I heard her say in that kitchen rewrote 12 years of a relationship in approximately 45 seconds, and the rewriting was happening faster than I could keep up with it. I had told my daughter I was sick to find out who she was. She had told me, through a kitchen doorway in 45 seconds, exactly who she was. Welcome to True Family Story. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from, and let's get into it. My name is Walter Greer. I am 67 years old and I live in Chattanooga, Tennessee, on a street called Ridgewood Drive, in a split-level house that my wife Carolyn and I bought in 2001, the year our daughter Melissa was 19 and our son James was 16, and the mortgage was the second largest number I had ever committed to, the first being the business loan that had started everything 12 years before that. I founded a small commercial printing company in 1989, Greer Print Solutions, out of a rented unit on Broad Street downtown, 2 employees, 1 industrial press, and the kind of specific stubbornness that the first year of any business requires in quantities that are difficult to predict before you are inside them. By the time I sold it in 2018, we had 34 employees, contracts with law firms and hospitals and university systems across the southeastern United States, and a reputation for quality that I had built by caring about quality in the way that only a man who knows a bad print job personally can care, which is to say deeply and without apology. The sale was good. I will not give you a number, but I will tell you that Carolyn and I had planned to travel, to take the time we had not taken during 30 years of building something, to do the things that people say they will do after, without being specific about when after means. We had a list. We had talked about Portugal. Carolyn died in 2020. Stroke, sudden, a Saturday morning in November, while she was in the back garden cutting the last of the season's roses, which she did every November because she said dead roses left on the cane were a failure of attention, and she did not fail at attention. She was 63 years old and married to me for 38 years, and she had never gotten to Portugal. I want you to understand that loss before I tell you anything else, because everything that follows is shaped by it. Melissa is 41. She lives in Hickson, 12 minutes from my house, with her husband Todd and their 2 boys. She runs her own marketing agency, is competent and driven in the specific way of women who started proving themselves early and never found a reason to stop. She is the child who was most like Carolyn in the visible ways, the drive, the organizational clarity. She is less like Carolyn in the ways that are not visible, which I know because Carolyn could read those too. James is 38. He lives in Nashville, 2.5 hours away, calls on Sundays with the consistency that matters more than precision does, works in architecture, and comes to Chattanooga for every holiday. James and I have always had the ease of 2 people who do not need to explain themselves to each other because the understanding runs underneath the language. Melissa and I have always had the difficulty of two people too similar in specific ways and too different in others, who spent 41 years negotiating a gap without fully naming it. Carolyn was the bridge. After she died, the bridge was gone, and what Melissa and I had managed in the 2 years since was functional and warm on the surface, and not always fully honest underneath. In the fall of 2022, something changed. Not dramatically, in the specific small ways that things change when you are paying attention to the right things. Melissa had mentioned, twice in October and once in November, that Ridgewood Drive had been seeing significant appreciation, and had I thought about what I wanted to do with it long term. She brought up the business sale at a Sunday dinner in November, asking how the installment payments were structured, which was not a question she had asked before. In December, she mentioned Todd's brother, who worked in financial planning and had offered to sit down with me to review my portfolio. The first time Todd's brother had been offered in any professional capacity across 11 years of knowing him. Small deviations, a pattern assembling itself. The kind that a man who spent 30 years managing the details of a business learns to recognize before it names itself. I did not confront Melissa in December. I did not mention what I was noticing. I went home from Sunday dinner and I sat in Carolyn's chair, the wingback by the window that I had moved to my side of the bedroom after she died, and which is the place I do my clearest thinking, and I thought about the test. I did not want to run it. That is the first thing I want to say about the February Wednesday when I told my daughter I was sick, that I did not want it to be necessary. What I had wanted since November 2020, when Carolyn's gardening gloves were still on the back step when I came home from the hospital, was a daughter who called because she wanted to talk, and not because she had calculated a reason to. A daughter who came on Sundays the way James came, without an agenda. A daughter who had asked me in 2 years how I was doing, without working toward a resource that was accessible through the asking. What I had was what I had, and I needed to know the full shape of it before I built anything in response. The diagnosis I invented was a cardiac issue, not cancer, not something with a dramatic trajectory, something that a 67-year-old man might plausibly have found, that would explain some monitoring and some concern, without being so alarming that I could not sustain the story for the weeks I would need. I had researched enough to be specific, and not more specific than a man who had just received news would be in the first telling of it. I called Melissa on a Tuesday, and asked if she could come Wednesday afternoon. I said I needed to talk to her about something. She said of course, and heard the weight I had put into the phrasing, and did not press me on the phone for what it was, which I took as considerate, until I understood later that it was something else. She arrived at 2. She looked well, the specific well of a woman who manages herself carefully, and she came inside with the purposeful energy she brought to everything, and sat across from me, and looked at me with the focused attention of someone who is ready to receive information and process it. I told her. She crossed the room and held on for a long time and cried, and I held her back and said it was going to be all right, and I meant it, though not in the way she believed. Then she said she needed a moment, and she went to the kitchen. I sat in my chair. I listened. The voice came through the doorway fast and low, and I heard the specific words that stopped me in the hallway when I got up to follow her. I am going to tell you what she said. But first I need you to understand the context in which she said it, because the what matters less than the when, which is 30 seconds after she stopped crying in my living room, and the who, which was Todd, and the how, which was quickly and without any of the weight of the moment she had just left behind her. She said, "It's confirmed," he told me. A brief pause. "I know. Listen, call your brother tonight. If this is as serious as it sounds, we need to move before James gets involved. The house goes on the market in this neighborhood at $750 minimum. If we're listed as joint owners before anything changes, we control the timing." I stood in the hallway and did not move. She said, "James will want to hold on to everything. He always does. If we move fast, we can have everything structured before he even gets a chance to weigh in." Another pause. She said, "The investment accounts are the priority. I need Todd's brother in front of those documents before anyone else is. Just set up the meeting." Then she said, "I'll call you back. I love you." and I heard the specific warm finality of a person ending a call, and I stepped back from the hallway doorway, and I went back to my chair and I sat down. Melissa came back into the living room 30 seconds later. Her eyes were still slightly red from the tears. She sat down across from me and took my hand and said, "Dad, we are going to figure this out. You are not going through this alone." I looked at my daughter. I said, "I know." I meant nothing that I said for the rest of that afternoon. Nothing, which was not something I had ever done before in my life. Certainly not in this house. Certainly not in Carolyn's living room. She stayed for 2 hours. She was warm and practical, and organized in the way she was always warm and practical and organized, and by the time she left she had already mentioned, twice, that Todd's brother really did have excellent experience with estate restructuring, and that it might be worth a conversation in the next few weeks, before things progressed, just to get ahead of it. I walked her to the door, she hugged me again, the second long hold, real again at the surface, and she said, "Call me if anything changes," and she drove away. I stood on my front porch in February, and I breathed the cold air of a Chattanooga winter evening, and I thought about Carolyn in the back garden in November 2020, cutting the last roses before the cold, and I thought about who I had believed Melissa to be, across 41 years of being her father, and I thought about the gap between the believed version and the kitchen doorway version. Then I went inside and I called James. If you are with me, hit that like button, drop a comment, because what James said when I told him, everything changed how I understood what I needed to do next, and in the best possible way. James answered on the first ring. It was a Wednesday evening, not his Sunday call, and he heard the difference immediately. He said, "Dad, what's wrong?" I told him everything, the pattern I had noticed since October, the test I had designed, the Wednesday afternoon, the kitchen doorway, all of it, in order, exactly as it had happened, with the specific phrases that had stopped me in the hallway. James was quiet through most of it. Not the silence of shock, but the silence of a man processing information carefully before he responds to it, which is how James had always been, and which is one of the reasons I have always trusted him with the honest version of things. When I finished, he said, "She said before James gets involved." "Yes," I said. A pause. "She thinks I would want to hold on to everything," he said. "That is what she said." "She is not wrong about that," James said. "I would want to hold on to everything, but not for the reason she thinks. I would want to hold on to everything because it is yours and you are still here, and there is nothing to distribute yet." I sat in Carolyn's wingback by the window and looked at the February dark through the glass. "What do you need from me?" James said. I told him. I needed him to not call Melissa, not yet, not until I had spoken to an attorney and understood what the documents said and what they could be made to say, before anyone else had a chance to have them say something else. I needed him to continue his Sunday calls as though nothing had happened, which he could do because nothing had happened yet on his end, and there was nothing to perform. And I needed the name of a good estate attorney in Chattanooga, if he had one. He did not have one in Chattanooga specifically, but he had something better. He had a colleague in Nashville whose wife practiced estate law, and who had handled a situation 2 years earlier that James described as having a similar shape to this one, which told me that this shape was not as unusual as I would have preferred it to be. Her name was Christine Barlow. She had an office on Market Street in Chattanooga, which I did not know, because James's colleague had simply given me the name without knowing the city, and which felt like one of those coincidences that is too useful to question. I called Thursday morning at 8:30. She answered herself, and said she could see me Friday at 9. I was there at 8:40. Christine Barlow was 54. The kind of woman who wore reading glasses on a chain, and did not apologize for anything about the way she ran her practice, which was quietly and with complete authority. She listened to me for 17 minutes, without writing anything down. When I finished, she said, "Mr. Greer, I have 2 questions. First, what is in the current will?" I told her, "Equal distribution between Melissa and James, written in 2017, with an attorney who had since retired. with specific personal property assignments attached as an exhibit, and the house listed as part of the general estate to be liquidated and divided. And the business sale proceeds, she said. Are they documented separately from the estate? They are in investment accounts in my name only, I said. Carolyn and I had separate accounts for the business proceeds from the beginning because of how the installment structure was set up. Good, she said. Second question. What do you want the outcome to be? Not legally, in your family. I had been sitting with that question since Wednesday evening, in Carolyn's wingback, in the February dark. I want to tell you what I had concluded, because the conclusion is the heart of everything that follows. I did not want to punish Melissa. I want to be honest about that, and careful about it, because the distinction between not wanting to punish and not wanting there to be consequences is important. I did not want to act out of anger or cruelty or do something irreversible in the heat of a feeling that might look different in 6 months. What I wanted was accuracy. I wanted the documents to reflect what was actually true. I wanted Carolyn's house protected from a transaction designed to extract value from a dying man at below market price by his own daughter, even though the man in question was not dying. I wanted James to know that what I had was his, as much as his sister's. And I wanted Melissa, eventually, to sit in a room with me and her brother and the truth, without the management and the performance and the listing, at $750 minimum. I told Christine these things. She wrote for a long time, more than I had seen any lawyer write at a first meeting. When she finished, she looked up and said, I can give you all of that. What I want to do first is a complete asset inventory, certified and filed, so that the documented picture of your estate exists in its accurate form before Melissa, or anyone she has enlisted, has an opportunity to present an alternative picture. That takes about 3 weeks. While that is happening, I want to revise the will, not the core distribution, but the governance, the same kind of structure that protects the estate from being managed by someone with an undisclosed interest. And I want to address the house specifically, because from what you have described, the house is where the immediate risk lives. She mentioned joint ownership, I said. I know, Christine said, which means someone has already told her that joint ownership is a mechanism that could work, which means this is not a spontaneous idea, and she has been getting advice from somewhere. Todd's brother, most likely, if he is the one pushing for the meeting. She paused. Mr. Greer, has anyone presented you with any documents to sign since October? I thought about it carefully. In December, at the Sunday dinner where Todd's brother had first been mentioned, Todd had handed me a piece of paper at the end of the evening. He had described it as a newsletter from his brother's financial planning practice, an overview of estate planning options that he thought might be useful for me to have. I had taken it and thanked him and set it on the counter when I got home and had not looked at it since. I told Christine this. She said, Do you still have it? It might still be on the counter, I said. Please look when you get home, she said, and do not throw it away if you find it. I found it when I got home. Not quite a newsletter, a one-page document on professional letterhead from a financial planning practice in Hickson, the same suburb where Melissa and Todd lived, with their address and contact information. On the back, in small print, a section headed Authorization for Portfolio Review, with a signature line at the bottom, and above the signature line, in language that was careful enough to be technically accurate and vague enough to be significantly broader than a newsletter suggests. I authorize the above-named practice to review and assess the investment accounts and estate assets listed in my disclosure for the purpose of providing financial planning recommendations. A signature line, on the back of a newsletter, handed to me at a family dinner. I called Christine from my kitchen. She said, Do not sign it. Scan it and send it to me tonight. I did. She called back the next morning. Mr. Greer, the authorization language on that document, if signed, would give Todd's brother's practice legal access to request documentation of your investment accounts from the financial institutions directly. It is not a power of attorney, but combined with the right follow-up steps, it is a first move toward obtaining account information that would give them a complete picture of what you have before you are aware they have it. She paused. This was handed to you at a family dinner as a newsletter. I want you to think about that. I thought about it. The newsletter that was not a newsletter. The Todd's brother who was positioned as a resource, but was apparently already engaged in something more specific than being a helpful family contact. The joint ownership comment in the kitchen doorway, which was not an instinctive response to bad news, but a planned next step in something that had been moving since at least October. Melissa had not driven to my house on a Wednesday, and cried real tears, and held on for a long time out of love alone. She had also been executing step 2 of something that had a step 1 and presumably a step 3, and the execution had been smooth enough and the tears real enough that if I had not been listening at the kitchen doorway, if I had been the man she believed she was managing rather than the man who had designed the test, I might never have seen the step for what it was. "Christine," I said, "how fast can we move?" "The asset inventory, 3 weeks minimum if we do it properly," she said. "The will revision I can have drafted in 10 days. The house protection I can file as a trust transfer within a week, which means the house is protected before anything else is settled." "Do the house first," I said. The house transfer was filed on a Thursday, 9 days after my first meeting with Christine. The Ridgewood Drive property moved into a trust with Christine as independent trustee, and James as co-trustee, with terms identical to what Margaret Chen had built for Arthur in Raleigh. No sale without independent valuation and co-trustee approval. No family member as buyer or buyer's agent. No professional representative of any family member involved in any transaction without co-trustee written consent. The house was protected on a Thursday. Melissa called on Friday to ask how I was feeling. I said I was managing. I said the doctor had given me some additional information, and I was processing it. She said of course, and asked if I needed anything, and I said no, and thanked her, and ended the call, and sat in the wingback and breathed. The asset inventory was complete, in 22 days. Christine called it thorough, which from Christine I took as the highest available designation. Every account, every investment, every asset, correctly classified and valued, and filed with the specificity of a woman who did not leave gaps for other people's interpretations to occupy. James drove up from Nashville the weekend the inventory was complete. He sat at my kitchen table, and I showed him the full picture for the first time, the actual numbers, because James had been calling on Sundays and trusting that the family was what it had always been, and he deserved the actual picture. He sat with it for a while. Then he said, "Dad, how long did you know before you ran the test?" "Since October," I said. "I wish you had called me in October." "I know," I said. "I thought it might be nothing." "It was not nothing," he said. We ate at the kitchen table. We talked about his project in Huntsville, and about the boys, his nephews, growing faster than you can track when you see them 4 times a year. We talked about Portugal, which I had not been able to talk about since Carolyn died, the list feeling too specifically hers to open without her. James said, "Mom had a whole itinerary planned. Did you know that?" "No," I said. "She showed it to me in 2019. She said she was waiting until the sale closed, and then she was taking you, whether you liked it or not." I sat at the round kitchen table Carolyn had insisted on, because she said rectangular tables had a head, and she did not believe in heads at dinner tables. And I thought about an itinerary she had not shown me, and a determination to use it whether I liked it or not. I would have liked it completely. "We should go," James said, "this year, you and me." "Find the itinerary," I said. He smiled. Carolyn's smile. "Already looking," he said. The will revision was finalized on a Friday, 3 weeks after the house trust was filed. Christine called me at 4 in the afternoon and said everything was signed and filed, and I was protected in every direction she could identify, and she had looked in all the directions. I thanked her. I made dinner. I set the table for one the way I set it when James was not there. Less formally, but not carelessly, because Carolyn had also said that a man who stopped setting his own table has stopped expecting company, and she did not want that for me. Then I called Melissa and asked if she and Todd could come for dinner on Sunday. Sunday in March in Chattanooga is early spring on a good year. The red buds were already going, which happens faster here than people expect. And the Ridgewood Drive street had the specific quality of a neighborhood that has been doing well for a long time and is still doing well. The lawns beginning to come back, the front porches starting to have people on them again. Melissa and Todd arrived at 5:30. Melissa looked the same as she always looked, competent and carefully put together, and Todd had the practiced friendliness of a man who has been performing it long enough that it has become his default expression. James was already there. He had driven up that afternoon and was sitting in the living room when they arrived, and the specific calculation that moved across Melissa's face when she saw him was fast, but not fast enough. We ate dinner. The conversation was careful, the kind of careful that happens when 4 people at a table know that something is going to happen, and only 2 of them know what. Todd talked about his work. Melissa asked James about his project in Huntsville. James answered fully and warmly, and I watched him across the table and thought about a man who does not need to perform warmth, because it is what is actually there. After dinner I said there was something I needed to tell them. I said, "In February, I told you I had been diagnosed with something serious. I want to tell you now that that was not true. I am perfectly healthy. I had a full physical in January, and there is nothing wrong with me." The table went quiet. Melissa looked at me. Her face did something that I watched closely, because it told me more in about 3 seconds than the kitchen doorway had told me in 45, which is that the primary emotion was not relief. The primary emotion was something harder to name, closer to the feeling of a person who has moved a piece on a board and is now being told the board is different from what they believed. "You said you were diagnosed," she said. "I said I had been told something serious," I said. I was careful about the wording. The serious thing I had been told was not about my health. It was about what I was noticing. "What you were noticing," she repeated. "Since October," I said. "The House comments, the financial advisor, Todd's brother, the newsletter with the signature line on the back that was handed to me at dinner in December." Todd looked at the tablecloth. "I needed to know who you were," I said to Melissa, "in the moment when you believed something was wrong. Not who you are at Sunday dinners when everything is fine. Who you are when something changes, and there is a decision to be made about what matters most." Melissa was very still. "You went to the kitchen," I said. "You called Todd, and you said, before James gets involved, we need to move. The house goes on the market at $750 minimum. If we're listed as joint owners before anything changes, we control the timing." The silence in the room was the particular silence that happens when words are said in a specific place that they were spoken in a different place. When someone discovers that what they believed was private was not private, that the wall they were behind was not as solid as they had assumed. "Dad," she said. "The house," I said, "is in a trust with an independent trustee, and your brother as co-trustee. It was filed 3 weeks ago. The terms make what you were planning impossible, not as a punishment, as a protection. The will has been revised to reflect the same values it has always had, equal distribution, but with governance that prevents anyone from managing the estate in a way that benefits them at the expense of the other beneficiary." End quote. The signature authorization Todd's brother sent home with me as a newsletter has been documented and filed with Christine Barlow's office as context for the estate record. Todd looked up. First time since the newsletter was mentioned. "Todd," I said, "I want to be clear that what your brother did, presenting a legal authorization as a newsletter at a family dinner, was not something I can simply note and move past. Christine's office has documented it in the estate file, which means it exists as a permanent part of the record of this estate's management. Whether you chose to understand what you were handing me, I do not know. Whether you did, I think you do." Todd said nothing. There was not really anything available to him. I looked at Melissa. She had her hands flat on the table, the way people put their hands flat on surfaces when they need to feel something solid. Her eyes were bright in the way eyes are bright when a person is holding something back, and I could not tell, sitting across from her, what it was that was being held back, and I had not been able to tell for long enough that I was not going to assume. "Melissa," I said. I am not asking you to explain what I heard in the kitchen. I do not need an explanation. What I heard was clear enough. I paused. What I am asking is whether there is a version of this that is honest, not going forward from this evening in the managed direction you have been moving. Honest. What you actually need, said directly, without the financial advisor, and the Todd's brother, and the newsletter. She was quiet for a long time. James sat across from her and did not say anything, which was what I had asked him to do, to be present and let the conversation go where it went without pushing it. Finally, Melissa said, "The agency has been losing money for 2 years." The table was very still. "Not catastrophically," she said, "but enough. The pandemic changed the client base, and we have not fully recovered, and I have been carrying 2 employees I cannot afford to let go, because they have been with me since the beginning, and I do not know how to do it." A pause. "Todd's brother is a real resource. I did not manufacture him, but I pointed him at you instead of asking you directly, because I was afraid of what asking you directly would look like." "What would it have looked like?" I said. "Like I was coming to you for money, the way I always ended up coming to you for money," she said, and her voice had lost the practiced surface and arrived at something that was smaller and more real. "Like I had not learned to manage my own life after 41 years of you managing yours without ever needing help from anyone. Like I was asking you to fix something for me again." I sat with that. Carolyn had known this about Melissa. She had said it once, not about the money, but about the pattern underneath the money, that Melissa was a woman who needed to be seen as capable so badly that she had made needing anything into something to be ashamed of, and that the shame produced the managing, and the managing produced the distance. She had said it gently, the way she said things about her children that she did not want me to use as a verdict. I had not used it as a verdict. I had filed it in the category of things Carolyn understood that I was still working toward. "Melissa," I said, "you could have called me in October and said you needed help. I would have listened." She looked at the table. "I know," she said. "What you did instead, the newsletter, the joint ownership, the timing before James gets involved, that is not something I can undo what I felt when I understood it. But I want to separate it from who you are. You are not those things. Those things are what fear does to people who are afraid of asking for what they need." She looked up at me. Her eyes were the same as when she was small, the same dark brown that Carolyn had, that particular shade that in certain light looks almost black. "I am afraid of asking for what I need," she said. "I know," I said. "You get that from me." James made a sound across the table, small and involuntary, and the closest thing to a laugh that the moment could hold. Melissa looked at her brother. Something passed between them, the kind of thing that passes between siblings when they are in the same room, with a truth that involves both of them, and they have not been in the same room with it before. "The agency," James said, looking at his sister. "What does the gap actually look like?" She told him the number. He nodded and wrote something on the edge of the napkin. He looked at me. "That's manageable," he said. "Not a gift. A loan structure. Christine can document it properly, so it is part of the estate record, and comes off Melissa's share at distribution. Clean, documented, and Dad knows about it from the beginning. Clean." I looked at my son, the architect who designed things that went up and stayed up. "That is one option," I said, looking at Melissa. Melissa looked at James. Then she looked at me. Then she looked at the table for a moment and pressed her hands flat against it and breathed. "I should have just asked," she said. "Yes," I said. "You should have." "I am sorry, Dad." I looked at my daughter, 41 years old, with her mother's eyes, and a failing agency, and a fear she had been carrying so long she had organized a plan around it rather than asking for help with it. The plan had been a bad one. The fear underneath it was one I recognized. "I know you are," I said. We stayed at the table until 8 o'clock. Todd said very little for most of it, which was the appropriate response to his situation, and which I respected him for more than I had expected to. James and Melissa talked about the agency the way they had not talked about it before, which was directly and with the specific honesty of people who have been in the same room with a truth and decided to stay in it, rather than manage around it. I made tea at 9 because Carolyn had always made tea at 9, and the habit belonged to the house as much as to any person. I put 4 cups on the table. We drank tea and talked about less difficult things, and by the time Melissa and Todd left at 9:30, the room had lost most of the weight it had carried when dinner started. Melissa hugged me at the door. The long hold again, the real kind. I held her back. I did not say it was all right, because it was not entirely all right, and she knew it, and I knew it, and some things need to be said accurately, even in a hug. What I said was, "Your mother would have had this conversation in October." Melissa laughed against my shoulder, the specific broken laugh of a woman who is crying and laughing at the same time, and she said, "I know. She told me once that asking for help was just telling the truth about what you needed." I forgot. "Remind yourself," I said, "often." She left. I watched the taillights at the end of Ridgewood Drive, and then stood on the porch until the cold of the March evening reminded me I was 67 years old and had been standing in it without a jacket. I went inside. I watered Carolyn's 2 remaining plants, the ones I had managed to keep alive across 2.5 years of solo caretaking. I sat in the wingback by the window. James came and sat across from me. He had his phone out and he turned it toward me, and I saw, on the screen, a scanned document that I recognized as Carolyn's handwriting before I could read what it said. Dense and organized, the way she organized everything, with a heading at the top that said Portugal, itinerary, first draft, and a date from 2019. I looked at it for a long time. "First draft," I said. "She was revising it," James said. "She had notes in the margins. I found 3 versions." I looked at my son. "We are going," I said. "May," he said. "I already looked at flights." I sat in the wingback in Carolyn's living room and thought about a woman who had cut roses before the cold came and made an itinerary she did not get to use, and raised 2 children who were, in the honest accounting, doing their best with what they had been given, which was imperfect and human and still more than enough to work with. The house was protected, the documents were accurate, the record was honest, and somewhere on James's phone, in 3 increasingly detailed drafts of a trip that had not happened yet, Carolyn had already done the planning. We just had to go. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment and tell me which moment landed hardest. Hit that like button, subscribe if you are not already here. And if you have been afraid to ask for what you need for so long that you have organized a plan around the asking, let me tell you what Carolyn would have said, what she did say to Melissa, and what I have carried since. Asking for help is just telling the truth about what you need. That is all it is. Tell the truth. It is enough. It is always enough. True Family Story uploads every week. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss one.